Hey, good day, folks. It's Leon here today with the Profitable Sheep and Goat Production Podcast, and I'm back again with my friend Matt. And today we have another friend, Big Tom Perkins from Big Tom's Conno Creek Farms. Did I get that right, Tom? Almost.
Got it. You got it right. You got it
All
right.
right. And he also is Big Tom from the Grazing Sheep Podcast. So we're happy to have you here today, Tom. We'd like to dig into this grazing subject. And I told Tom, let's talk about what to do with too much grass. So glad to have you here, Tom. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. It's I've been listening to you guys from the beginning, and it's nice to be on there. I know I like to tease you guys, and we like to have these little podcast wars where we when we meet in person, we kind of argue back and forth, and it usually ends up being a lot of fun. Because you guys give back just as good as you take. So I always enjoy a good argument. Yeah, yeah.
Where are our rankings at, Tom? Have we surpassed past you yet?
No, no. So the rankings are kind of funny because we were ranked like number 2, and the one that was ranked number 1 was about sheep hunting. It wasn't about raising sheep at all.
Oh, yeah,
And
the categories.
then we were ranked in the top 5 for grazing, and I was like, I didn't really think that was. I'm not sure who does this ranking. I think it's all AI stuff.
Yeah.
It's artificially inseminated. Is where they come up with this stuff. But
Either way, it gives us something to argue back and forth about.
oh
Who's,
yeah.
who's number one and who's number two.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. Yeah, but yeah, Leon, I was up there at your place for your field day, and you had just moved sheep out of a pasture to put them into a pasture that had already been grazed because you had a handling system there, and you wanted to show that handling system. And there were people there that were learning how to do Famancha checks, and so while those folks were off doing that, there was a group of people standing around, and I had just mentioned that with as much grass as that you have at this point, which is just seas of grass, and it seems like everybody on the East Coast, that's the way it is this year. We've had really, really good growing conditions early in the spring, and it warmed up good in the spring. We had lots of rain, and that grass has just exploded. And that pasture that we were standing in that you'd just taken sheep out of to move over for that demonstration, just looking at it, to me, there was a third of it trampled down, there was a third of it that had been eaten, and there was a third of it standing. And with that much grass ahead of you, I felt it was time to move. And I think you had said that the sheep have been in there about 24 hours. Is that right? Or is it a little longer than that?
I'm trying to remember how that was. That's too many days ago.
Yeah. But I think right around. I think they've been in there just about a day.
Yeah.
And I think the paddock that you had come from, I think you said you'd been in there 3 days.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, and so the utilization rate had greatly increased. It was grazed down. What wasn't grazed down was tramped down, which is a good thing. But I feel like when you have that much grass ahead of you, you need to get moving. And
Yeah.
just going through it. So you run into a couple of options. One is to try to make hay out ahead of you, but you have to kind of think that through quite a bit because you're going to want to get some regrowth there, and you have to plan out your days far enough ahead of time that by the time your sheep get there, you've got something for them to graze. And you don't want it too short because you can be in that parasite zone, and it's just not healthy for the grass. But the other kind of scary part of that is, we're in these 90-degree days right now in this stretch of nice weather where you could actually make hay. And that's really going to dry that ground out fast. And if there isn't some rain come behind it, that grass is really going to slow down. That soil temperature is going to increase quite a bit. And so it's a bit of a gamble to go that route.
Yeah.
And so I feel like if you
That's-
grade, go ahead.
I tried that last year. I took some hay off like the last 2 years, and I had kind of decided I wasn't going to take any hay this year just because so when you came through my pasture gate, let's say,
Yep.
and moved back toward where the sheep were, that had grazed once this spring, and right when you go through the gate, that first section of pasture is the ground's not quite as good, and I that's where we could have taken hay off of. It would have been almost like a second cutting because I had already grazed it once. But I didn't wanna take hay off of that again. I wanted to come back through the trample that to leave a bunch of residue there,
Mhm. To try to
and
build that soil up.
yeah, build my soil up.
Right, because that piece of ground there you said's a little poorer than the rest.
And I had the section across the woven wire fence, which is the center of my property,
Mhm.
above the pond there. I didn't wanna take hay off of that because there again, that has some shallow spots on where they scraped the topsoil off, I think, when they did the pond, and I really wanted to get that trampled because now I had all that grass is like 3, 4 feet tall, and I really wanted to graze that, I didn't wanna hay that. So
Yeah, so in my situation here, our farm's down in a valley. It's really rocky ground because it was strip mined. I like to tell people that, we used to be on a hill, but by the time we were done picking rocks, we ended up in a valley. The, and I've got pictures where we just buried 8,000 feet of water line. We literally dug down 4, 5, 6 inches at the most, and then you were just into this shaly subsoil, black, uh, rock that's got iron ore in it, rocks that were the size of my gator that we pulled out, and, what's funny is now you go out and look at all those rocks, and they're all covered in rust from the iron ore that's in them. It's, I always love taking people out and showing that our rocks actually rust. And, it's slowly these rocks break down. I don't know what they are, but they're a really weird rock. They just fracture all over top of them. Um, but so we have to watch because that can get really, really dry really, really fast.
Mhm,
The other weird part is when it gets wet, it is horribly wet. And
mhm.
right now, my farm's like a swamp. If I want to mow hay, I'm gonna have to do it with like a pontoon boat or something. Because you go out with a tractor now and you're just gonna make ruts. It's it's kind of a unique situation. All the farm ground that's above us, all their water drains off and comes down to us, and so we just tend to stay wet. So we're just trying to move sheep through as fast as we can, and we're trying to leave that third trampled, a third eaten, and a third standing. And if it dries out, then we've got that all that forage to come back to that we can still graze again if we need to. If we get some timely rains and all that bounces back, we end up going in and taking some hay off that. And we've already grazed through the whole farm once, so this would be the second time through. Then that ends up being like a mix of like a third first cutting and like 2/3 of a second cutting grass hay.
Yeah.
And we did that last year. Last year's spring was completely different, and we could graze through twice pretty early, and then about the middle of June, we were able to go in and take that hay off, and that just made some really pretty hay.
Are you clipping at all behind the sheep, or you're leaving you said you're leaving about a third there, you're not clipping that at all?
No,
Yeah,
no, I try to take hay off, like, once every 3 or 4 years on each
yeah,
pasture, and then that's about the only time it gets clipped. If we could easily get multiple rows, just take off like crazy
mm,
down here, and, I get a pasture that's too bad and there's not enough there to take a hay cutting, then I'll go out with a brush hog and just try to just, I'll clip it, but I wanna stay pretty high
yeah,
until I come up that multiple rose bush, and then I just bury the bush hog down in it and
yeah.
try to take it out by the root almost. And, quite often, I'll see the dirt fly when I hit it, but
I have a question on that, on multiple roses. Do your sheep go after them at all? 'Cause I know goats will, but
yeah, but they tend to just pick all the leaves off. Very seldom do they take any of the, like, new shoots that are
yeah.
growing. Very, very seldom do I see them
So
take.
they're not actually suppressing it, they're just
I feel like they're only weakening it only because
yeah,
they're pulling leaves off.
Yeah.
It hasn't really seemed to make any kind of a dent in it. For a while, I did have, I think I had 5 goats out there, and, quickly realized I'm not a goat guy by any stretch of imagination. I had to turn them out in the wrong pasture and then hope they would jump the fence and into the right pasture. That was about the only way I could, succeed in keeping them where I wanted them. But I had, ironweed really bad here. They just back when I had cattle, they wouldn't touch it, the sheep wouldn't touch it, and they brought those goats in, and boy, those goats just loved that ironweed. And now there's hardly any ironweed here at all because the goats taught the sheep how to eat it.
Uh-huh.
And I thought that was just flat out amazing, and now they seek it out. They see it and they go right for it.
Yeah, that is interesting how sheep will learn to and even cattle, and I'm sure goats, they'll learn to like a certain plant if but it might take them a while.
Yeah,
Uh,
thistle, my sheep wouldn't eat thistle, my cows would eat thistle,
yeah,
but the sheep wouldn't eat thistle until I brought the goats in. And
yeah.
once the goats started hammering any thistle, then I don't know whether the lambs learned it or the mature sheep learned it, but now everybody just
I I've heard of guys going out and spraying molasses on the weeds that their sheep won't eat to
yeah,
train them to start eating them. I don't know, I
yeah,
never tried
that I
it.
I definitely think that would work. I'm just way too lazy to do that kinda stuff,
Yeah.
and, I hope I don't have to bring goats in again to teach them how to eat a particular plant, but
Yeah.
we've noticed when we rotationally graze, we move sheep every day, and we noticed that if I put them in somewhere where there's a lot of plants in there that I don't think they'll wanna eat, if I can make that paddock smaller, there's a much better
Mhm.
chance that they'll start eating that because there isn't much else to eat, but also at the same time, we get to trample all that stuff down.
Yeah.
I agree with you, Tom, on the multiflora rose. Mine strip the leaves off as high as they can reach.
Mhm.
I don't feel like it's not getting worse, but neither is it like, are they really eradicating it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm seeing more of that rosette disease, I think is what that's called, where that, multiflora rose will actually turn red. And, I read a long time ago that just once that happens, you should just leave those plants alone because it has that disease in it, and that disease will eventually kill that plant. Um, that multiflora rose has just a lot of root system to it,
Mhm.
and, I've gone up and pulled it out, and within a year or 2, it's right back in the same spot and usually more plants than I started with.
It sounds like a pretty good forage. Why are you trying to get rid of it?
Well, if I can get my sheep to eat it other than the leaves, like I say, they love picking the leaves off.
Yeah.
I don't have much of it, like, just it doesn't grow just in the middle of my pasture. There's a few clusters of trees here and there, and the back section of my pasture actually go into the woods a little bit, and I have some of it back there. So I it doesn't really bother me, I guess, if there's a few of it, and I'm a beekeeper too, so I like to see the bees on those flowers even though I hate multiflora rose in my fence rows.
Yeah. Yeah, these are something I've always wanted to get into, but just haven't got there yet, and won't be long before I'll be too old to be able to do it, so that'll be nice.
You just need to come up and see me again sometime and get a bee suit on, and you'll get addicted to them.
I don't think it'd make a bee shoot that big for me.
Oh, I bet they do.
I need to get, like, 2 or 3 of them and duct tape them together.
I cheaped out on the bee things. I let somebody else keep bees at my place. I do like them. I just don't feel like taking care of them yet. So he has his bees here and gives me honey, so
Yeah.
I'm all happy.
Yeah, I've offered, a few people, and they get all excited about it, and then I never hear about it. I never hear from them again, so
Yeah,
I don't know.
yeah.
Yeah, so
Oh,
we got derailed.
yeah. Well, I
Yeah,
wanted to on the we were on the rotational grazing thing and talking about, moving fast this time of year when we have lots of grass. If we're done with that, I would like to talk about so what happens as we get into summer, our grass growth slows down. Now we can go back and maybe target some of those spots, especially that were extra weedy. Some of that might depend too what species. I mean, obviously we're talking sheep and we can talk goats too, but, you know, if we have some dry ewes later in the summer, those would be a great candidate to go back to some pastures that were just really weedy that we wanna graze off hard. But yeah, I'm just curious, Tom, on what you do as the grass starts slowing down with your rotational grazing.
Does it
Well,
slow down?
I was gonna say, one of the things that I have noticed, by leaving that much behind,
Yeah.
it seems like I'm keeping the soil a lot cooler, and I don't always see it slow down like I used to back when, we just continuously grazed and all that kind of stuff. And, we used to take hay off the entire farm. But yeah, I think, I don't see the slowdown as much as I used to. Now, if we get extended dry periods, that grass will start getting crunchy just because, there's just not much of a topsoil there to hold the moisture and so on in. But I do feel like we don't get that big summer slump like we used to get.
Mhm.
But that's exactly what we do, though. We come back through, and if I've got, a section that was really standing more than I like to, I'll just try to narrow that paddock up.
Mhm.
And maybe that means I move sheep twice that day or even 3 times that day, but really try to target those and try to tramp those down. The other part too that I really like about leaving that, a third of that forage standing, if if they've got if that ends up going to a seed and that becomes a viable seed, when those sheep come back through, to me, that's just free seed that I'm putting
Yeah.
in the ground.
Yeah.
And if unless it's a weed that, or just a plant in general that they won't eat, then I'm all for letting it go to seed. I just feel like that just makes the pasture thicker and thicker, and we're just adding more and more to that soil seed bank.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think it makes it just a huge difference in since we started doing that. Um, I know at your field day there, Lee, and there was that was a big topic. Was people were all upset because their grasses were all seeding out and heading out, and I was just like, that's an opportunity to me. And at this point, I'm not leaving my seed heads behind at all, because that's the first thing the sheep are heading.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
I got a video the other night. So they had about no, they should have they need to be moved by the next morning, let's say, but there was still these clumps with seed heads, and those sheep I had a video, they were just walking around, they were all of them just, like, popping off them seed heads.
Yeah,
Just
yeah, but I'm moving sheep now. I've got stuff that's maybe 3 foot tall, and with no seed heads on them. They picked the seed heads off.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, what we often talk about when grass goes to heads out, it starts slowing down, and it does, because that's
Yep.
what I say that's what a plant of grass, that's its going life basically is to go to seed, right?
Yep.
So when we let some of it seed out, yes, that plant's gonna slow down drastically, but the thing is, that dead or that stalk that's drying down is providing some shade for the ground below and the greener stuff down below, and at just a casual observance, that paddock can look or like driving by on the road, it's like,
Oh
"Boy,
yeah.
what those things eating?"
Mhm.
But,
Yep.
yeah, so we had a pretty dry summer, not this past summer, the summer before, and you would drive around the town here, you would see pastures that were, like, brown,
Yeah.
but my sheep were still eating nice green grass. You'd walk out there and you had this understory of nice, lush growth, clover and grass and everything, and it was just
Yeah.
perfection.
Yeah. I agree with you 100%. You know, I've always been told that just like you said, that a grass's job is to grow, produce seed, and then stop growing. But all my life, we've taken off hay that was grass hay, and I don't know that there's ever been a time we were able to get in fields early enough to get the grass off before it went into head. And yet, there's always a second cutting that grows, and we've mowed everything off. And
Mhm.
so I've always wondered, is that really, really true that that plant actually stops growing, or does it just change and just put out little leaves? and so on to help it recoup for next year.
But you're letting it go to seed head, but you're still taking that seed head off then when you cut it to make hay. So that
Right.
has to regrow again.
Yeah.
So the question would be more like if you would just not do anything, not graze it, not hay it or anything, it's not gonna regrow as much. Like it will take
Not that plant, but I think I
yeah,
think you get little leaves that are going to come up,
sure.
and I think that's what our sheep are eating when they go back through the next time.
Yeah,
There's a lot of that we call regrowth, and it's really still some growth from that same plant.
yeah, yeah.
And I think too, if you listen to any of these soil gurus, they'll talk about fungal soils and bacterial soils, and you want this ratio that needs to be, just perfect, and nobody knows exactly what
Mhm.
just perfect is. But there's a lot you can do with pulsing, where in the spring you're tramping down a lot of green stuff, and that pushes your everything towards more bacterial, and then in the fall you've got more of the brown stuff that you're tramping down, and that tends to push stuff more towards the fungal side.
Mhm.
So I think that just that pulsing back and forth um, changes biology, increases biology, encourages biology in that soil, and I think you get a lot more going on in there too.
Mhm.
And I think with grazing, you'd brought it up, Matt. You need to look at your class of animal. If you've got lambs that need to make weight by a certain date, then maybe you need to come back in behind those ewes 30 or 45 days. I was worried about parasites, so I always want it to be, as long of a rest period as I can. Where those, maybe you got a pile of ram lambs and they've got maybe your target is they've got to hit, a third of a pound or a half a pound a day. Then you got to have them on, some pretty decent forage.
Yeah,
But if you've got open ewes, early gestation ewes, they don't need that
yeah,
massive amount of really good forage. You can use them as I always think of them as bulldozers, as they're out there just knocking stuff down and uh, and tramping and making better pasture for the stuff behind. I used cows for a long time to make really good sheep pasture.
yeah,
They worked really well. I got rid of my cows 2 years ago, I think it was now, maybe 2.5 years ago, and and the main reason was because I could graze sheep 365 days a year, but I couldn't graze my cows 365 days a year because they tear my pastures up.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
And right now, if I had cows on a pasture, they'd be pugging things up because
Mhm.
some spots are just horribly, horribly wet.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think that's something, like the I don't know, I'm gonna call it targeted grazing, but changing your grazing practices to the results that you want for that particular field. Like we don't just have to fall into a rotational pattern and this is what we do. We can say like, hey, this pasture's really getting a lot of weeds in. We're gonna graze it off a little harder with, like you said, some open ewes or something like that. Like, and we can do things like that. Or if you have kind of a brushy pasture, forest, whatever, you can graze that harder and push some of that brush back. And yeah, I think that's an important part of the grazing management, I think.
Yeah, I think it is. There's so many different names that people come up with through the years, as opposed to the management intensive grazing, which I think was one of the first terms that I had heard of. But I think adaptive grazing makes more sense than anything else,
Yeah,
because there isn't a cookie cutter recipe where you use the same exact size of pasture every day, and you really can, you targeted is a good term too, because you've got an area, and that's going to be your target, and you're going to change how you're grazing to get the result that you want in that.
yeah,
I think it makes a big difference. I've got a barnyard that grows up in burdock like crazy, and I've got a group of sheep uh, standing in that barnyard. It's really small, and they're not happy, but they are just obliterating it. And I went out this morning, and they're actually starting to eat the stalks now. And so I want them to eat the stalks down. And my goal is to go back through and spray each one of those little stalk stems that are left.
yeah,
And to try to get that annihilated. And it started, it's probably 5 years ago. My right hand man, I noticed there was a couple of plants out there, and I said, "You better go get this pulled out of there before they go to seed." And he didn't. And every year I look at that paddock and I look at CJ and I say, "Remember those plants I told you to pull out? This is the result of it."
Poor
And
CJ.
what's that? Porsche's?
Okay.
Yeah. Well, it's one of these things you have to learn. You know, he's going to inherit the farm one day. So that's that was his lesson. He's learned that lesson well, because we'll be out in the pasture doing something, and all of a sudden I see him walking off. And I'm like, where the heck's he going? He found one of those plants and he's pulling them out. He just wanted to see it all over the farm anymore.
Yeah, burdock would never survive in my pastures.
The sheep will go after it.
Oh, they'll just eat it right off.
Yeah, mine do too. They absolutely love it. But
Farmyard though is where if
it grows back all the time.
Yeah.
That's what gets me, is how much it grows back. And then when, I have these long rotations, we try not to come back to a pasture for 90 days. And that's what we try to make our minimum. And I started doing that because of parasites. And then I realized how much growth I could get and how much quicker that grass bounced back. That's where, we let some of these weeds start to get out of hand, because we're getting them that nice long rest periods.
Yeah. Yeah.
Have you seen any changes in the forage species since you've been doing this more of an intense grazing strategy?
Yeah, I'm not great at identifying plants. I tend to only identify the ones that the sheep don't want, or I think just absolutely shouldn't be there. But so we have bird's foot trefoil all over this farm, and we think that it was planted when they first put this farm back after it was strip mined.
Probably.
And the and I didn't see it for years, because we just made hay all the time, and there wasn't any of it anywhere. And within maybe the 3rd year of grazing, all of a sudden they just started popping up. And that's one of the other things that I like about these long rest periods. I feel like it lets a lot of those legumes go back to a seed. And then when the sheep come back through, they're knocking those seeds off, or they're eating them and they're passing through them. I don't know how it works exactly, but it seems like legumes have just exploded on the farm in the last few years. Other than last year, I didn't see a legume until probably the end of September, 1st of October. There wasn't a clover plant anywhere. It was insane. I kept thinking, what did I do? Did I graze it out? I really thought I had just majorly messed up somewhere along the way, because it wasn't anywhere. And talking to a few other folks around, they're like, yeah, we didn't see a lot either. And I think it was just it got so hot and so dry so fast that the clovers just wouldn't come. But again, this year it's exploding. There's clovers everywhere.
I got clover like crazy. It's just
Yeah, the bird's foot trefoil was the one that really took off and did really, really well. I played music and toured for a lot of years. I came home in '96 with the intentions of working cruise ships. And mom got diagnosed with cancer, and so I decided to stick around, and I ended up growing roots. But when I first came home, this farm was covered. It had been in CRP, Conservation Reserve Program, and it was covered in hairy vetch. And nobody knew what hairy vetch was.
That's good feed, isn't it?
It's an excellent feed. I had 2 guys come out from Penn State because nobody could tell me what this plant was. And we walked all around the farm and looking, and it was probably 2/3 of the farm was purple, because it was just covered in it. And so they pulled a couple plants out of the field, and they came back down to their cars, and they got their agronomy books out, and they were searching through their books. And the guy said, I think this is it here. And they started looking, and like, yeah, it's a square stem, and there's something about the leaves. The leaves they're not directly opposed from each other, they're offset or something. And like, yeah, that's definitely it. And then they're reading down through it, and then they both start laughing. And I'm like, "What's so funny?" And they said, "Well, according to the book, it won't grow here."
It didn't read the book, did it?
Yeah, and the farm is absolutely covered in it. And I said, "Well, what's it called?" And they said, "Hairy vetch." And they'd never heard of it before. And I looked for seed for it, and it was like $52 a pound. And and I was like, "Well, we definitely can't afford to seed this stuff." But I didn't realize it was an annual at the time that, it grows and then that plant dies, but it puts off these little pods with all these little seeds in it. Like almost the little pods look like a soybean
Mhm.
Well,
pod.
it's in the pea, probably in like the pea bean type family or like
Yeah.
legumes. So it'd be in the
Yeah. So with our grazing, we always end up with a section that we've kind of grazed out, but there's seeds in the ground that will end up coming back the next year. And then eventually, we'll hit places where that's just pretty well dead, but the seed pods are there, and I always feel like the sheep are trampling those into the ground, and it's going. But yeah, it always amazes me that '96 Penn State didn't know what this plant was.
well, they
And
plant 'em
it
everywhere now.
seemed like within a few years, everybody knew what that plant was.
Yeah.
I feel like it's one of the number one like cover crop
Yeah.
plants to put in.
Yeah.
I don't think you could plant rye without there being hairy vetch seeds in the rye.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty popular in the cover crop world
Yeah.
as a legume. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's a fantastic plant. Um, I guess there is a certain stage where if cattle graze it, it can be poisonous. Nobody ever told my cows because they just devoured it.
I've not heard that.
I've heard a couple of different people. I was on a Zoom call uh, with a bunch of folks from Canada, and they were all worried about it. And they're like, "We just have it popping up everywhere, and it'll kill cattle." And I'm like, "Well, it never killed any of mine."
Mhm.
And so I guess there is a certain stage, and it may be the seed pods. Maybe those are poisonous at some point, but I can't find any literature on it whatsoever. We've never had an issue with it. We've got hemp dog bane. That's supposed to be poisonous, but
Yeah.
don't tell my sheep because they love it.
Yeah.
Remember I talked about that at the field day, Tom.
Yeah. Yeah.
That
It's crazy.
Yep. As soon as you started talking about it, I'm like, yep, I know exactly what he's saying because my sheep just love it.
Are you talking about the hemp dog bane or the poisonous hemp what do they call that? Poisonous hemlock, I think?
No, that's
The
something.
tall white flowered stuff?
Yeah. Yeah. It
That's
looks like hemp
okay.
dog bane to me looks
Yeah,
a little.
I know what it looks like. I never heard that it's poisonous before. But we
I
have
don't
that
know where this comes from. Leon had a great explanation for it.
So I started digging into it because when we bought this property, I brush hogged it the first fall. That's next spring, hemp dog bane came up like a crop.
yeah,
Like it almost looked like a soybean field.
Yeah.
Leaves are a little bit oval shaped, just like from a distance, it looked like a field of beans.
mhm,
And I started freaking out because, like, I read about this stuff online. It's like poisonous to livestock. And so I actually got the co-op to come in and spray some of the pasture.
yeah,
This is before the fence was even up. And I was really worried about spraying because I didn't want to kill a little bit of clover that was there and all that. But the stuff was pretty tall. And so it wasn't, I figured, well, spray isn't going to get way down into that underneath the canopy of all that anyway. And I told the guys, I said, don't waste time going around the tree. Like just get the worst of it. And so anyway, we get the fence put up, put the sheep out there. And the very first thing, I put the sheep through the gate and there was a little corner right there that the sprayer didn't hit. What do you think the first thing was that the sheep were eating?
Hemp dog bane.
Smelling off that dog bane. Well, interestingly enough, I ought to go back and read up on it again, but every website I would read pretty much quoted word for word each other, each article.
Yeah.
And then I found somewhere it all traced back to, I can't remember if it was a Penn State or an Ohio uh state article. But then I found somewhere that somewhere in some research, they got something mixed up with some house plant that looks like hemp dogbane that is toxic. I might just for interest's sake dig that article up again.
So you don't think it's poisonous at all? Like, some of those plants are only poisonous at certain stages or something like that, and I usually find, if we're not pushing the sheep to eat it, they're pretty smart with that.
I
But
agree with
you're
that.
thinking it's not poisonous at all.
I know
My
guys
sheep
that
eat
eat
it like candy. They just
the hell
love it.
out of it, and, I mean, it's in my hay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Some of the fields around here, when it's in there and the sheep beat it dry and they literally devour it
Wow.
when it's grown in the field.
I never I don't think I've ever seen it in our pastures. It's a bit of a
Won't
problem
survive.
until crop fields. It's
Won't
hard.
survive in your pasture.
Probably not. Yeah, I've never seen it. I mean, like I said, we have some of our crop fields where we fight it, and it's a problem in our no-till crops because of that root structure. Like, it's so hard to kill, and then
Yeah.
it comes back so fast. Like, if you just mow the top or burn the top off of it, it just sends up shoots so fast again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that was how we got it. We had a neighboring farm. A new guy came in to farm that, and I was talking to him. I think the following year, and he was complaining about hemp dogbane being in that field, and he said, he goes, I don't know why it doesn't surprise me because all our fields have hemp dogbane in it. And I thought, I never saw this plant until you started farming this over here. And I think he brought it in from
Brought the seeds in.
other, yeah, brought seeds in, just being on the machinery and so on.
Yeah,
And then just with the wind, it blew over into our place. And I was really worried about it for a while because I kept thinking, how am I going to control this? Because it seems like there's just nothing that will kill it.
yeah,
And then when I found that, the cattle ate it, the sheep ate it, and, just like Leon had said, I've always heard how poisonous it is. And I'm like, well, my cows and sheep have never read that book, so they don't know.
yeah.
So I just let it go. The thing I don't like about it, it seems like in the fall of the year, the sheep will just nip the leaves off. They won't eat the actual plant. And you're kind of walking around and there's like all these sticks. And
Mhm.
when we were using netting all the time, yeah, the netting would just get hung up on those stupid little sticks all the time, and it was just aggravating. Now we don't use netting anymore, so it isn't much of an issue.
Yeah.
Yeah, the hemp dogbane it's in the hemp family, like, they used to use that stuff. I think another name for it's Indian hemp.
Okay.
They use the fibrous stem to make stuff, so it's pretty tough.
Yeah,
Well, especially when it starts drying down.
yeah,
It's out almost it has a pretty succulent stem and branch when it's green and vegetated, like,
Yeah.
it actually, when you break it off, it beads out a little bead of white milk, kinda like milk
Yeah.
has.
It's similar to a milkweed
Been the same,
almost. Like,
I
you
should
can easily
say,
confuse the 2 if you don't know better.
yeah.
yeah.
But so it would be the same family too,
Well,
probably.
I don't know if I wanna say that on a podcast, it's a fantastic it's a cousin, we'll put it that way.
It looks the same. Well, so I'm curious, do you guys have any of that poison hemlock?
I haven't seen any here yet.
I
Uh, we were down in Virginia for the ram test. It took a bunch of rams down there for that, and it was everywhere. I couldn't believe it. It was just up and down every roadside.
Yeah.
Roadside ditch had it growing in it.
Yeah.
I don't have it in my pastures or anything, but, I mean, it's around here, I see it in the road ditches.
Yeah.
I was talking to some guys in Iowa here a while back, and they claim their sheep eat the stuff.
Mine do. I've never I'm a little bit I'm pretty bad for um worrying about problems once they arise, not because I think there might be problems, because yeah, I've never worried about it. We got it along the creek banks here. It seems anywhere out in the pasture where we clip it, after a sheep graze it, we don't get it. It doesn't survive that. But then on the creek banks and things, but yeah, the sheep will eat some of it. Like, once it gets to a certain stage, they don't. But I've never worried about it. Like, once it gets tall, I just go out there with a shovel and, cut it, spade it out basically, and just throw it there. And I've never had sheep get sick from it, so I don't know.
If you read up on it, I think certain stages, which a lot of plants are that way,
Yeah.
or when it's more highly toxic, but
Okay. Yeah.
I've heard multiple people now say that their animals eat it.
Okay.
Mhm.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we just don't have it here on the farm. I haven't really even seen it just driving up and down the road. Like I said, when we were in Virginia, it was everywhere. I couldn't believe how much. I kept thinking, this stuff's so bad. How come somebody's not out spraying this stuff and
Yeah.
killing it?
Yeah.
But
Hmm.
yeah, they hadn't done anything to it.
Yeah, I should go after it a little more on our farm, but, like I said, it's annoying, but that's about it. But,
Yeah.
yeah, I was just curious. You guys dealt with it at all?
No, but just don't have it. So so I know, getting back to the grazing and so on,
Yeah.
you've got a couple of more months to graze until you have to start thinking about stockpiling.
Yeah.
And I think that's the other part of this too, Leon. When you're leaving that much grass in the beginning, I almost feel like you're already starting to look at your stockpile for winter because you're not stressing that grass at all. You're
Mhm.
letting that grass build up a good, healthy root system, and you're keeping that ground covered so you're keeping moisture in there. And then when those fall rains come again and that temp starts cooling off, then that stuff just takes off.
Yeah. I
I
do
have a
like a stock
I have a question with that then. So if you're getting and you were saying since you're, leaving more, you don't get into that summer slump as much. But
Hmm.
if you get into a really dry spell, at what point do you decide to just pull the sheep off and feed them some hay and let your grass regrow?
Well, I'm in kind of a unique situation in that we lamb three different groups, three different times of the year.
Yeah,
So we breed in a barn, we lamb in a barn.
yeah,
So each group of sheep is probably only actually out on a pasture for 9 months of the year.
yeah,
So last year in the fall, I kept thinking it's going to rain, and it wouldn't rain that week. And I think, well, it'll rain next week, and it wouldn't rain. And it just kept getting worse and worse and worse and worse. And so typically I leave sheep in for just one heat cycle when I go to breed them.
mhm,
But this time I said, you know what? Let's just leave them in. Let's just feed them some hay and just let them go. And we actually ran out of grass. Um, I think it was March 13th, and that's the first we ran out of grass for a long time. That's why I built that Hay Sleigh 2000. I don't know if you see that on the internet or not, but it's basically I just built a sled and then built a hay rack on top of the sled and
okay,
dropped a round bale in there, and then just took one paddock and just moved that sled every day. So they didn't have this big giant, you know,
yeah,
pack of hay waste that they had in there.
yeah. So you basically have a sacrifice lot,
Yep.
dump in there, feed them hay rather than ruining all your pastures.
Yeah, and
I think that's a
I felt
good
like we
point. I think a lot of people leave their sheep out too long. Well, we're running out of grass. We'll just graze everything down to bare bones.
yeah.
Well, you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot for long term.
You are. You're really messing yourself up for the next summer because you still want to have, I always think of these blades of grass as being a solar panel.
Mhm,
You want to have those solar panels out there so that when that the temp starts to warm up, the ground starts to warm up, and you've got that sunshine out there, that they're able to start that photosynthesis right away, take advantage of that right away, and start, building their root reserves and growing.
mhm.
And getting all that biology, waking up again and just cranking in that soil.
Yeah.
So we definitely, like I said, it's the first year that we ran out. Now we had a group of sheep that had lambed, and we had them with lambs. We had them up on our dry lot, which wasn't very dry. And then we had a group that was getting ready to lamb, so they were in the barn. And then the third group that was out. And so we didn't have a whole lot that we had to feed hay to. But I've talked to a lot of people, especially on the cattle side, where they've grazed probably way too hard. And you go out and measure that forage, and you know, let's just say you're getting an inch a day, and let's just say that inch a day equals, 100 pounds of dry matter that you're gaining on that forage.
Mhm.
I would think come August, September, if your pastures are short and they will grow, I think you pull them off then and
Yeah.
start feeding the hay then.
Yeah.
Because your haystack isn't growing at all. In fact, with a lot of people, they've got hay stored outside, it's actually shrinking.
Yeah.
So, and your forage is growing. And so instead of feeding hay in, October, November, you start feeding hay maybe August, September and let your stockpile grow.
Yeah.
We're lucky enough that that we've got our grazing set up so that September or August, I always figure August 15th is where I start thinking really hard about stockpiles. So where I'm grazing August 15th, that's gonna regrow.
Right.
Where I'm grazed in, September 15th, that's gonna regrow. Where I graze October 15th, which is where typically our first frost date, that's gonna regrow, but it's gonna regrow really, really slow. The September 15th isn't gonna grow as much as the August 15th.
Mhm.
So even though we're still grazing through that and we're grazing bigger paddocks, we feel like we're still gonna get a good bit of growth, behind us. And we still have 90 days ahead of us yet. And so you start looking at that October 15th, you start looking at the 90 days out, you're looking at November, December, January 15th. We're grazing, what was basically stockpile, and then we're starting back into where we had left August 15th. But that all had lots of time to regrow.
Yeah.
So you can kind of manipulate your stockpile that you can come back around. But I would agree. So last year we probably would have been further ahead to kind of stop where we were grazing. And had I known we weren't going to get any rain till December.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we just known that was going to
Yeah.
happen. Uh,
It's tough.
and my 2024 lambs didn't grow well at all.
Yeah.
I knew they were hurting. And I wasn't getting the growth out of them that I wanted to have. But I kept thinking, it's going to rain.
Yeah.
It always rains in the fall.
Yep.
I've
Not
got
this year.
14 acres of hay that we seeded in on September 1st.
Yeah.
And seeded it because it always rains in the fall.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it just didn't. And those hay fields are pretty poor this year.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good point, like, with the summer grazing. I always try to do that. If we get into that summer slump, and I don't have a very good grazing program, I'll just say that, but, I am quick at and when we get into that summer slump, let's put them in the barn and feed them and let our
Right.
grass rest. Uh, what about when we're grazing those stockpiled forages in the wintertime? How far can we take that down? Because I know there again, I'm bad for, going into fall, winter time, grazing it down to almost nothing, and taking what's there. Am I hurting myself by doing that? Should I be leaving a little more for regrowth, for that solar panel? Does
Yeah,
it
I think you still want to leave a good 4 inches there. Yeah, just
Okay.
just for that solar panel.
Yeah.
Um, the first year that I met Cameron Meyerly, my podcast partner, he came down here and it was in November and he could not believe how much grass we had. And, I would walk out and I would pick this grass up that looked like it was about the middle of your calf. Well, you'd pick it up, the blades came up past your hip.
Yeah.
And that year I strip grazed a lot because I felt like if I just gave him the normal paddock, we were trampling a lot down, which
Yeah.
is good for the soil. But I was like, man, there's so much forage here. I just want to just give them this tiny little strip. And I mean, like a foot and a half, 2 feet.
Yeah.
The sheep couldn't wander through it and trample it all down.
Yeah.
And we didn't do that all winter, but just in that, one section there of pastures where it was so thick and it was all kind of laid down, but you could pick it up. It was past your hip. And we just kind of strip grazed that just to increase the utilization rate of it.
Yeah. Well,
And that was a
winter's
little
not
hard. That was a little hard to regulate
Yeah.
to keep them so they didn't overgraze that because they wanted to take it right to the dirt. So I would
Yeah.
do them 4 or 5, 6 times a day. which is a lot, you
Yeah.
know. But I felt like it was worth it in that instance, and then we only did that on maybe, I don't know, 5 acres, 6 acres of it, and then after that, we were back into much shorter stuff.
Yeah. When I don't think winter time's necessarily the time that you wanna be trampling your grass as much, in wintertime when you're grazing your stockpile forages, you wanna utilize them, that's your
Right.
most valuable forage in a way.
Right.
Because when that's gone, you're feeding hay. In the
Mhm.
springtime, when there's just grass everywhere, that's where we wanna trample it and give the soil that, health benefit of
I think spring, summer, and fall. I think you're not hurting yourself with all trampling. I still think it's a good thing. You're still feeding the biology that's in the soil. You got all those microbes that are in there, your bacteria, your fungi. You got nematodes that don't look anything like a regular toad, and just lots of stuff like that.
yeah,
If you just keep working that. If you're still tramping down there, late fall, early winter,
yeah,
that ground doesn't freeze.
yeah,
It actually keeps that ground warm. I know back when we're running cows is where I noticed it the most, where I first noticed it. Where the cows had grazed, those fence posts would freeze into the ground.
yeah,
But where they hadn't grazed yet, you could easily step them in, you could easily pull them out.
yeah,
And we're talking, like 18, 20-degree weather.
yeah,
And, that just amazed me because I go to put fence posts in the ground. I kept hitting frozen ground, but if you look for a clump of grass,
yeah,
suddenly that wasn't frozen there, and you could easily put a step-in post in. And that's when I started thinking about that. By covering that ground, we're keeping that ground warmer
yeah,
and keeping that biology working. It's not near as active as it is, when you're in that, 70 to 80-degree range.
sure,
But I still think you have that biology is still working in that soil.
yeah,
And I've seen in December and January, not when it's 18 degrees out, but I've seen December and January, we're actually seeing regrowth
yeah, yeah.
in that. And I think it's because the soils are still warm.
And especially when you get into February, you get those the warm sun, boy, you get a little bit warm weather, that grass perks right up.
Yeah, it always amazes me.
Yeah,
It's not fast regrowth by any stretch of the
right.
imagination, but there is a bit of regrowth there, and that floors me,
Yeah.
because
That's all
we've
part
all gone
of the
through we've all
season.
driven through town where we see a guy out in December where he's mowing his grass. These guys are just meticulous about their stuff, that they have signs up they don't want robins landing on them because it bends the blades of grass the wrong direction. And, but they're out there trimming.
That must be up in your corner of the world, Tom. I'm starting to with our discussion before we started recording, I'm starting to wonder about your corner of the world, Tom.
It's a weird place. It's a weird place. We always see this in town. We don't talk to those people. We just drive through and just kind of shake our heads. And man, it must be nice to have that much time. Yeah, I let my yard go another week. I'm gonna turn my rams that I got for sale. I'm gonna turn them into the yard and let them graze and save a little hay.
There you
Yeah.
go, and save the planet at the same time, right?
Save the planet at the same time. Yeah, it's kind of crazy.
Uh,
Yeah. Well,
But,
anything else you wanna add yet, Tom?
well, I think
uh,
we should talk about his podcast.
Well, yeah, we gotta let him put a plug
Yeah,
in for that.
okay.
On the grazing thing, anything you wanna add yet?
nothing other than I'm in Western Pennsylvania in Palm Bell, PA. We're about 10 miles from the Ohio line, so we're basically from the bottom of PA to the top of PA. We're just about smack dab in the middle of it. Just to give listeners, an idea of what I guess that's latitude is. And so, Leon, I know you're a good bit further north, and so it makes things a little bit different. Matt, I think you're a little further south.
And east, yeah.
Anyway, yeah, a good bit.
Ways, yeah,
But I
yeah,
tend to you look at the latitudes. I know when I go to speak, that's the first thing I look at is, where are we at as far as latitude? Because you start getting a little further south, you start getting into more of the fescue belt and so on. And you start going further north and, things change as well. But that's just to give listeners just kind of a context of where we're at and that kind of a thing. So we run 150 ewes here, and we saw a good bit of breeding stock. And so, this year I've got more people asking for ram lambs than ram lambs that I have. And, everybody wants those negative 90s, and there's only so many to go around.
Right.
Yeah.
You're talking about fecal egg counts, right? Negative
Yeah,
negative 90,
the parasite,
parasite
fecal
resistant,
count. Yep.
EBVs. Yeah.
Yeah, we push really hard for parasite resistance because we're grazing all the time.
Yeah.
Right.
And if you do a good job grazing, you don't have to have really parasite resistant
Yep.
sheep. I've got ewes that are just horrible for parasite resistance. And I breed those to a Suffolk every year and sell those as those hothouse lambs, those 60, 70-pound lambs that we just run straight to the auction as soon as we wean them. And because they're not going to make, good breeding stock. But I never worm those ewes.
Yeah.
That's the way we graze. We try to stay out of that parasite zone and just keep those sheep moving.
Yeah. Yeah, I found that out when we got into some other breeds that I know aren't parasite resistant, and we still don't have a lot of parasite problems just because of the rotational grazing that we
Yeah. Yeah, it makes a big, big difference.
You can make a bad sheep look pretty good.
Yeah.
Yep, that's the truth.
Yeah.
As far as the podcast, I think we're up to 125 episodes on that. I'm pretty proud of that. We've been doing it for 2 years last February, and we haven't missed a single week yet. So pretty proud of that as well. New podcast comes out every Tuesday morning at 7 a.m. I didn't check this morning because every once in a while I do mess up the there's a little schedule thing on there, and occasionally I'll mess up the AM PM.
Yeah.
I've been known to mess up the day once or twice too. And once I went in and did an edit because I happened to notice that something was spelled wrong and then didn't realize that stopped the schedule. It just put it in limbo until you rescheduled it.
Oh, wow.
And so on a Wednesday, people started getting a hold of Cam and wanting to know, is Big Tom okay? Because there's no podcast. And everybody was concerned 'cause everybody knows I live alone. And so
Yeah.
Cam got a hold of me and I'm like, what? And I went and checked and it was like, yep, it still said, I forget what it said, but it didn't say published and it didn't say scheduled.
Yeah.
It was like pending or something. I was like, what? So I went in and got it going. But it's called the Grazing Sheep Podcast. It's the best podcast that's out there. Has anything to do with sheep.
Debatable, but we'll put a link to it in the show notes and
We'll let people go judge for themselves.
Yeah, they can go check it out for themselves. I have to talk to Lynn and see how.
Maybe we'll have a poll. We'll have a poll of our listeners afterwards. See what.
There you go. That'd be good. That'd be good. I have a lot of fun with it.
Yeah.
And so now lately we've been invited to a bunch of different places to come do a live podcast at whatever event's going on. And
Yep.
so we're going to go to the Eastern Alliance for Production Katahdins symposium there July, was it 11th and 12th, I believe that is,
Yep.
down in Elizabethtown, Kentucky.
yep.
So we're gonna do some podcasting down there while we're there. And we're going to record them there. They won't be live, but we'll record them there and then, put out some little snippets here and there with that. It's been a lot of fun and met a lot of great people.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the best part.
Yep.
For sure.
Yep.
Yeah.
I guess I'm going to get to take in the EAPK sale in the expo this year. That'll be.
Are you going down?
Yeah, I am.
Are you taking any sheep down?
No sheep down. I'm hoping to do an online sale here sometime the end of July if I can get my
Okay.
dates back in time.
Yeah. Yeah, that's always the issue is waiting on the data.
All right, Tom. Well, thanks again for coming on. It's been a good discussion.
Yeah. So if anybody wants to reach out to me, they can do so at bigtomperkins@gmail.com.
All right. There you got it, folks.
All right.
Want to give Tom a shout? He can rattle his chain.
Yep. So thanks for having me on. I greatly appreciate it. It's a lot of
Absolutely.
fun.
Thanks again.
All right.
Later. Thanks. Thanks again, folks, for listening to another episode of the Profitable Sheep and Goat Production Podcast. Just want to remind folks that Matt is planning to have a on-farm production sale there at his farm at Glenbrook Farms in Leola, Pennsylvania. That sale is Saturday, July 19. Also, remember, this podcast is hosted and sponsored by Lost Creek Wholesale, your source for universal feeders, as well as sheep and goat feeding and handling equipment. Visit our dealer page to find a dealer near you. And as always, if you have questions you'd like to hear discussed or have a suggestion for somebody we should get on the podcast, you can send me an email at leon@lostcreekwholesale.net. Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch up with you next time.